We have a Sun News flash for you right now. We're going to take you live to Ottawa. That's where women's groups are holding a press conference today as marathon hearings continue into the Fed's new proposed prostitution law. So let's listen into that right now.
Good morning. Thank you for coming this morning. My name is Hila Kerner. I'm a collective member of Vancouver Rape Relief and Women's Shelter. We are on unceded Native land, and we are here today as part of many women's groups, equality-seeking women's groups, who've been presenting before the Justice Committee during the hearings on Bill C-36. There are many positions, many opinions, but the common ground of equality-seeking women's groups is that the part of the new bill that call for the criminalization of men, Johns, pimps, those who profit, exploit, and benefit from buying women's bodies will be criminalized, but we reject and we call for the amendment of the criminalization of women who will be communicating in public space. We think that it's inconsistent with understanding of women's equality, and we are pressing for the Justice Committee to change the bill and to remove the part that is criminalizing women in prostitution.
I'm Trisha Bapti. I'm with EVE, formerly Exploited Voices, now Educating. As former sex industry women, we want to see the demand criminalized, for we know that it is men that are perpetrating the violence. The violence doesn't happen in a vacuum, nor was the violence perpetrated by the laws. It was actual men who perpetrated it, and we need the laws to stand up to this behavior. And we also call for the full decriminalization of our sisters. They should face no criminal sanctions for the positions that they find themselves in.
My name is Suzanne Jay, spelled S-U-Z-A-N-N-E-J-A-Y. I'm speaking as a member of the Asian Women Coalition Ending Prostitution. We're here because Asians are the largest group of visible minority people in Canada, and Asian women have a major stake in how Canada chooses to deal with prostitution. Asian women are very blatantly advertised in mainstream newspapers and websites, and very blatantly sold from Asian massage parlors that are embedded in neighborhoods across Canada. They are indoor prostitution venues and are storefront operations that advertise boldly and with seeming impunity. The pimps and the advertising vehicles that they support have normalized deeply racist and sexist stereotypes about Asian women. They pander to a demand for a sexualized racist experience of subordination. The packaging and commodification of Asian women's real or imagined characteristics is damaging to the dignity and equality of Asian women as a group in general. We support Bill C-36, but call for an amendment so that Canada does not criminalize women for their own exploitation.
Hi, my name is Lisa Stacey, and I'm here from the Canadian Association of Sexual Assault Centers. The Canadian Association of Sexual Assault Centers will tell the committee on Thursday that we support the laws in Bill C-36 that address the inequality inherent in prostitution, that criminalize the men, the Johns, pimps, and profiteers who are the source of the harm, danger, and violence that women in prostitution endure. We unequivocally oppose the proposed provision to criminalize women in prostitution in certain locations. We know that law alone will not completely prevent or eliminate men's violence. However, supporting a law that decriminalizes women in prostitution and criminalizes the men who buy and sell women in prostitution is an opportunity for society, through law, to stand up for and alongside women who insist on more for themselves and for all women than being bought and sold in prostitution.
My name is Natasha Fall. I am the founder of Sex Trade 101, and I am a sex trade survivor. Sex Trade 101 supports 150 current and former prostituted women in favor of Bill C-36. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for this public platform to address the issue of male demand for women's bodies. Bill C-36 recognizes prostitution is an issue of male violence and harms mostly women and children. The voices that claim prostitution is a choice only represent a small few and are not a fair representation of the mass numbers of women who want out. The majority of those in that prostitution harms are there because they feel they have no choice. No woman should have to accept violence to put food on the table for their kids or pay college tuition. Bill C-36 will target the root of the problem and send the message that this form of violence will no longer be tolerated in this country. It will provide real choices via prevention and exit programs and teach future generation of men to become men of honor. We must make a collective effort to protect society's most vulnerable and listen to survivors and support Bill C-36. Thank you.
I am Jean Sarson. I'm co-founder of Persons Against Non-State Torture with Linda McDonald. We're here to ask the committee to amend the Criminal Code 269.1 on torture because it is presently discriminatory, because only state actors or government officials can be held accountable for torturing. We want pimps and johns who do sexualized torture of children and women, that they be equally criminalized. And the committee can add torture to section 753.1 of the bill. Thank you for listening to us.
Bonjour, je vais parler français. Je suis Diane Matt de la Concertation des luttes contre l'exploitation sexuelle basée à Montréal, un groupe qui travaille au quotidien avec les femmes qui ont été ou sont encore dans la prostitution, et on apporte ici leur parole. Pour la première fois dans l'histoire du droit canadien, un gouvernement nous invite à examiner la prostitution comme un crime contre la personne, une forme de violence envers les femmes, incompatible avec la recherche d'égalité sociale, tout particulièrement le droit à l'égalité des femmes parmi les plus marginalisées. Nous saluons cet effort d'un Parlement. Nous souhaitons effectivement que le Parlement adopte une loi qui décide de criminaliser l'achat d'actes sexuels. La Cour suprême nous invitait à s'occuper ou de tenir compte de la sécurité des femmes. Pour les groupes qui sont ici aujourd'hui, la sécurité des femmes, elle réside davantage et premièrement dans la question, le droit de ne pas être prostituée. Donc, on doit avoir un Parlement qui dit très clairement non à l'industrie du sexe, qui dit très clairement que les femmes ne doivent pas être criminalisées pour être victimes d'exploitation sexuelle et qui investissent dans la lutte contre la pauvreté, dans l'allocation de moyens pour les femmes à sortir de la prostitution et dans des programmes qui font effectivement le travail similaire à ce que nous faisons. We're here to say to the Conservative Party that we want them to get rid of any criminalization of women in Bill C-36, but we're also here to say to the opposition that we expect them to stop hiding behind process, to stop hiding behind the Supreme Court decision, and to tell us as Canadian citizens that they do not support Johns and pimps in Canada, and that they do not think that by decriminalizing the sex trade, we're going to be working in a society that is based on equality. We want them to have the courage as a parliament. For us, it's a nonpartisan question that we're looking at, and we expect that committee to take a nonpartisan look at what prostitution is and to say clearly to Canada, to Canadian citizens, that buying sexual acts is contrary to women's equality, and especially equality of the most marginalized women. Thank you.
So as you can see, there is a common agreement among equality-seeking women's group that the element of the bill that criminalizing men, the Johns and the pimps, is very useful and very effective to abolish prostitution, and on the other hand, rejecting the intent to criminalize women in prostitution. A second element is the allocation of money to support women exiting prostitution. We judge the $20 million are far from being enough, and we're calling on the government to come up with a comprehensive social economic answer to the need of women in prostitution. We're going to allow questions now. Can I entertain a question? Can we use more of our time? We can answer more? Great. So if each representative can say how this issue of women's equality is relevant to the topic of prostitution. You don't have to keep the order.
I think it's important to remember that the group I'm working with and the women I'm working with were clearly expecting the Supreme Court to choose women's equality as the element with which to analyze the challenge that was made to the criminal code's articles. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court decided to apply a very narrow definition of what security means, especially security of the woman. And we expect the government now to clearly state in their preamble that we are addressing the notion of security and connecting or linking the question of security with the question of equality and say no to the sex industry.
Each representative can speak very shortly to that issue.
I'm speaking about the whole issue of discrimination that occurs around torture. In 1993 was the first time that my colleague and I became connected to listen to a woman who talked about being tortured, sexualized torture, and pimped by her parents since she was born. And since 1993, we have heard from over 3,000 women, some probably 1,000 in Canada, and in other industrialized countries who report the same thing, that they were pimped and endured sexualized torture for years before they could escape, I guess you would call it. And this is an invisible crime in Canada. And until we have the equality under the Universal Declaration that no one should be subjected to torture, the inequality of women and children, especially girls, will continue.
I think it's important for society to understand that the business transaction between a sex buyer and a prostituted woman, its foundation is built on the inequality, the gender inequality of women, and lies and threats of violence.
Part of our understanding of prostitution as a kind of violence against women rests on the understanding that it's a harmful practice that expresses and also exacerbates and reinforces women's inequality. And we feel that way about all forms of violence against women, and we don't think that prostituting women will make them equal.
Prostitution is a practice that relies on inequality between men and women, and men gain more power through the practice of racism, sexism, and taking advantage of women's poverty. That is something that affects Asian women in particular, very particularly if they're here as immigrants or with irregular immigration status. But also, the status that's accorded to Asian women as a group affects all of the women, all Asian women. The network of Asian massage parlors that exists across Canada is operated by organized crime and people who are not interested in promoting the human rights or dignity of Asian women. And so we are pleased that Bill C-36 criminalizes those people and does not turn them into regular business folk, and does not allow for the normalization of prostitution and the normalization of the stereotypes that are used to sell Asian women.
As long as women as persons can be commodified and bought and sold, we cannot have true equality. As a formerly prostituted woman, the situations that I found myself in, I was not there because this was a fair and equal exchange of goods and services. This was a commodification and almost an eroticization of my poverty, of my desperation, and the situation that I found myself in. And as such, we need to be standing up and saying to men that you can no longer chase after your own sexual desires and oppress women in the process of doing that.
Thank you very much. You have our contact information, how to get a hold of us for further questions, and we're going to be in the room for a few more minutes if anybody is interested in an individual interview either in English or in French. Thank you. Have a good day.